think you're just going to go through the technical instructions, and you're also going to stay here in case there are any technical issues, because I remember last time for some people they had to reload the screen because they were losing the connection.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, thanks.
So, yeah. So let's start. So welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar on homelessness and housing exclusion. So my role is to help participants and panelists to run the webinar smoothly. So before we get started, let's review some quick housekeeping items. So if you are joining us via computer audio, we do recommend you to wear a headset for a best quality. You will have the ability to submit your questions utilizing the chat option in the panel. My colleague Julia will address all your questions. And feel free to submit all the questions from now on. In case you would like to take the chance to ask directly your question or to share a comment, we recommend you to address them during the reaction time after the speakers. As a follow-up, you will receive the report together with the recording, PowerPoints, and the report. Yeah. As for the agenda, we will start with an introduction from Sorka Edwards, and then we have 3 presentations from Virginie, Union Sociale pour l'Habitat, Gerlinde from GBV, Austrian Social Housing Federation, and Donald McManus from the Council of Social Housing, Irish Council of Social Housing, sorry. So now, without any further ado, I will give the floor to Sorka for the introduction.
Thanks a lot, Abdul. So I will, if you change me to presenter, I will just go through a couple of slides to introduce the topic and to contextualize it in our work. So I will just try to open it again, show my screen.
Yes, we can see it.
And you can see it?
Mm-hmm.
Yes?
Yes.
Okay, hello everyone. Nice to be with you here, even if it's not in person. We decided with the team that it was really important to come back to this topic on prevention of homelessness, on housing exclusion and homelessness, because it's a topic that's coming up more and more in our work here at European level, both from the European Parliament and the European Commission. So it's important for us to have a clearer picture of where the members stand on this. So here I just had a slide which we use just again to contextualize our work. So that's again the full team of the European Commission of Ursula von der Leyen. And where to contextualize what we are looking at today, it's really focused on the social policies and social rights. Nicholas, the commissioner from Luxembourg, Nicholas Schmidt, and what he's looking for from us. So there he will be responsible for the implementation of the action plan on the social pillar, and as we have covered quite a few times all together in our social affairs working committee, it has now been released from the European Commission a consultation on this social pillar. And of course for us we will need to give quite a good feedback particularly on the principle 19, and it's by November 2020 this year. So just a quick reminder, as you know, principle 19, it covers housing and housing assistance for the homeless. So it's that will cover under A, access to social housing or housing assistance of good quality shall be provided for those in need. B, vulnerable groups have the right to appropriate assistance and protection against forced eviction. Adequate shelter and services shall be provided to the homeless in order to promote their social inclusion. So that's again just to contextualize. This pillar is not binding on member states, but it has been agreed by all member states, and it's increasingly being used to influence other parts of the work of the European Commission, which is key for us. So we need to develop our position on this in more detail with more feedback from the different members. As we know, it's quite diversified, of course, from federation to federation, to how to handle this. So what we would like to get a picture of is what your members see is needed in terms of support from authorities, from cities, from member states, and what support obviously could potentially be useful from the EU in preventing and addressing homelessness. And a point here is that recently in the last years, we've been getting a lot of feedback from members about the lack of resources, existing resources, to deal with growing social issues within the neighbourhoods. So that's before we even address homelessness or risk of homelessness. So growing poverty among social housing tenants, and more and better support needed from other parts of the welfare state. So for instance, growing numbers of addiction and other social issues related to mental health, for instance. So perhaps there's a need in many cases for more backup from the other services linked to the welfare state. And this Julian will go into a little bit more detail. Obviously, one of our key jobs is to also see if what financial tools at the EU level could potentially be of interest. Obviously, the most obvious ones in this case could be European Social Fund or the social window of the InvestEU, which is providing guarantees for investment. But later on during our discussion, Julien is going to run through also what's on the table potentially in the new recovery package, which I'm sure you've been reading about in the press, because obviously there's quite a few potentially very useful hooks, financial hooks there for us as well. So just a little bit about our approach so far on this issue. So as we have shared with you the letter to Commissioner Schmidt at the start of his term, and we stressed indeed that a holistic view of housing systems will help to address homelessness. And obviously also through a lot of our work, also through the state of housing, we constantly advocate for a structural approach to housing policy, which in many cases is missing. We also promote this approach on a structural approach to housing policies, and not one that just plasters over problems by increasingly relying on, for example, B&Bs or hotels to house people temporarily, but one that addresses structurally the issue. And we work on that, as you know, also at the United Nations level, so not only at the Commission, but also with the UN through our Housing 2030 initiative. However, we also recognize that regardless of how perfect a system might be, and we know none of our systems are perfect, many people still fall through the system. So I'll add to that increasing low wages, insecure jobs, high rents, lack of security for tenants in the private sector. There's constant work needed to also track those people that are falling through the system and to see what can be done. And there we have a good collaboration with FEANSA through the Housing Solutions Platform, which is really addressing those innovative initiatives, often in collaboration with services working directly on homelessness and with homeless people. And so new initiatives to reduce the amount of people falling through the net. And then obviously Housing First is an initiative which is achieved a lot of attention here at European level, largely due to the success that has been had in Finland. And we know that many other countries, and now France, for instance, is using EU support, EU financial support to on structural reform to develop their strategy on Housing First. So it's increasingly an issue that comes up here at European level. As you know, we already produced a guide on that with best practice from members and also a webinar. And just before COVID, we know a couple of members had approached us with the idea of having more exchange on that topic. And so that is something we can also consider how Housing Europe can offer an added value there. Then lastly, back to the current situation that we are in. So we've seen figures coming through. I mean, nationally you see them, regionally, also at European level, about the growing number of households that are at risk of not being able to cover their housing costs. and potentially at risk of losing their home because of unemployment due to COVID-19. In that context, a lot of you have sent us articles and news, and we've been putting that on the blog, how you've been working as a sector to really do your best to protect your tenants from this, so in this time of increased economic hardship. So I've just put a few links. I hope you've had a look at our blog there to see what your colleagues around Europe are doing. At the same time, we notice we have a lack actually of information about forecasts on the impact of non-payment of rents potentially on different federations, on your members. We also don't have a lot of information on what you're predicting in terms of longer waiting lists for social housing. So that's something that we would like to work on also with you, so that if we are asked for this information from the Commission, this can be also very useful, particularly now when the recovery package is on the table. And then obviously we want to touch and hear back about whether or not you've been engaged in the strategy to avoid the people who've been put temporarily in hotels, so people who were in street homelessness and put in hotels or temporary accommodation. What is going on at your level? Are you involved in a strategy to prevent those people actually going back to the situation they were in before? And this is actually very relevant. So just across the road here from us, there's a building which is usually rented out by the European Parliament, and there we have long-term homeless people actually being housed there at the moment. And of course, we're also wondering what at your level, what is happening around this scenario, which obviously will not go on for much longer. So thank you very much. That's a short introduction about what would be helpful for us to get feedback from our members, from you today, and obviously ongoing over the next months. Thanks a lot. I will stop.
Thank you, Soka.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was an excellent presentation about the reason why we are organizing this webinar today, the context in which or to which we want to react, and the kind of information we'd like to gather together with our members to be able to have a meaningful contribution to the work of the European Commission on this action plan on the pillar. So now what we're going to do is to have three speakers. We're going to kind of reply to some of the questions we have. So first we will have Virginie Toussaint from Union Sociale pour l'Habitat, reacting on the question of the growing waiting list and how we can cope with impoverishment of tenants, with an increasing difficult situation for social housing tenants. And then we will have a second part, Gerlinde and Donald, that will both look at the kind of cooperation that the social housing sector have or may have with other sectors in the view of combating homelessness. If we have time, I hope we will have time, I will show after the two parts some slides to put a bit in a context of what the EU has proposed in terms of the EU recovery plan. Anyway, if we don't have time, all the slides will be available, as well as the recording of the webinar. So, and as Abdou said, do not hesitate to ask your question on a little chat box, which is probably on the right side of your screen. So now I'm happy to give the floor to Virginie. We'll start with indeed Virginie with the French perspective on the increasing challenge regarding housing exclusion in France and how social housing providers are coping with this. So Virginie, hello, and the floor is yours.
Hello everybody, it's nice to be with you, even if it's via a webinar. Let me just present you briefly the Union Sociale pour l'Habitat, the French representation of public, non-for-profit and cooperative housing and social housing in France. It's more than 4 million of dwellings and more than 10 million people housed. So I was asked to talk about the growing waiting list and the consequences of loss of income for tenants after the crisis of COVID. Already a starting point before COVID crisis, the number of people on waiting list for social housing in France was already 2 million people. So it's quite huge, and we already know that there's a first effect on those waiting lists which will grow. It's the very particular French ones because it was local election today, this year. So as a local election are done this year, it means there's a frozen effect on the new permit for new building and new construction on social housing. I'm sure it can also happen in all other countries, because of course when you have new mayors and so on election, people are reluctant to engage themselves for new projects of construction. So it's a first effect, which is not related to COVID, but we already know that we will have a less production this year because of that. The second one is the COVID effect, because we put all the works and the new construction were also stopped for COVID reasons. So this means we will have some delays to produce this year, and also for new authorization also for this topic. You can add on it the fact that since 3 years now we are facing a very deep reform in France, and the amount for investment available for social housing provider is less than before. So this means already the context with and without COVID shows that we will not be able to produce as the same level that we were producing before. If you're adding the fact that, of course, our tenants will have a loss of revenue with this crisis, more specifically in specific region as Paris area, we already know that a lot of people lost their job. We already know that we'll have some impact on their revenue and also on the rent payment, of course. Today, we don't see a very huge effect on the rent payment, but we know that we will need to see the full year on accountability to know really what are the situation of our tenants. And of course, all the people who were on waiting list also will still continuing to be on waiting list, but new one will come also on waiting list because of the social and economical situation. So we are waiting to face a very growing waiting list situation to ask for social housing dwellings. So what we are supposed to do on this? Of course, we are asking we are producing some demand to the governments, and on this specific point, we are asking also support to be able to produce what we call more social kind of a product, very social housing, to be able to house people with small revenue or in a bad condition, social condition. We have in France 3 kinds of products as social housing: very low rent for most disadvantaged people, and we have social rent and medium rent. All those 3 kinds of products are defined according to the loans we will be able to have with the Caisse des Dépôts, and the condition of the square meter price for renting will be determined by the loans. But we already know that the stock to have a very very social rent is not enough already today for people asking this kind of product. And we know also already that it's the most difficult to produce, because usually local authorities are a little bit reluctant to choose this kind of product, because they have the fear that the social occupation of our stock will have some consequences of the life of a neighborhood, but also because as it's we need to produce it very cheap, so we need more support than loans, but we need also subsidies and grants. So this means that we are not able to produce as much as we would like. So we ask for a specific support from public authorities to raise the amount of subsidies and grants to be able to produce more very social housing. And of course, the abilities in the recovery package at EU level, talking about also subsidies this time and not only loans, is really important to produce this kind of product. Concerning the allocation process, we are involved since 4 years now in the Housing First policy in France, which is wider than the Housing First as we know it, as it is in Finland. It's a whole process to guarantee the people, the most vulnerable people, to access to sustainable social housing. So we are already committed on it. And as the allocation criteria are defined by laws, we are also committed to house most vulnerable people through the specific entry on right to housing. Because in France, we have the obligation to put in place the right to housing for the most vulnerable people, and they have a priority access to our stock when they are declared in this situation. Of course, the problem is more about the availability of the stock, because as I explained before, the people need also to pay their rent. So when they are in a very bad social situation, it's very hard for them to pay the other two products that are not a very social rent in our stock. We face on this specific topic last week some criticism from association with who we are working usually on this kind of public, because we learned that the most vulnerable people are not the people who are able to entering prioritarily in our stock. It's most difficult for them to arrive in sustainable social housing. So we really need to rethink with them, of course, the way to facilitate their access through allocation criteria that are defined by law. So it will be a new start to rethink the whole process to make sure that those people will enter easily in our stock. Concerning the fact that we produce some social support, we already put in place at national level a specific call for very disadvantaged people or homeless, which is called 10,000 supported dwellings, which is part also of a publication with the work with FEANSA. And this call was initiated by Union Sociale pour l'Habitat itself, trying to get some public subsidies to put in place a very inclusive path for housing, well-functioning housing first path, or for some people with a very specific problems, like Sorcha explained in introduction, like addiction or mental health problem. So we already know that it's the fourth call, which is working well within our members. We already have some conclusion of the well functioning of this kind of program. What we can say, it's already that what is complicated, it's the form, it's a call, so it means it has an end, And usually with a very specific public, we need more than duration, limited duration. Our members shows that generally when you are activating this kind of support, you will continue this support for many years. So it means that members have to put in place a very permanent structure to help the inclusion of this kind of public in our stock, and they say it means many people and also many time. So we are aware about the fact that a very specific people will need support for a long time, and this support is provided or internally by the social housing provider, or mainly in partnership with association to be able to answer very precisely to the problem. So for me, I think I did what I wanted. Maybe just adding a thing, because we talk about the consultation of the pillar of social pillar rights. So we already think about it and what we can ask. So what we would like to show is that the social housing is one of the key elements of a social protection to implement the right to housing for specific people who need the specific services, but it's working only if social housing is also a key element of a well-functioning market, because the housing market is a whole, and it needs many kind of actors, but in well conditioned to work.
Thank you very much.
It's okay. Yeah.
Thank you very much. That was very interesting. So, if I understand well, there's two big challenges at the moment in France. This first is about maintaining the level of new constructions, and supply has to be carried out. And indeed, you probably need more grants, because the supply that you're going to provide will be like social rent. So indeed, the gap between the cost and the rent will be probably bigger. So the first big challenge. And the second challenge, I understand from what you say, that we need to change the allocation system so that we can put higher priority for some vulnerable groups to make sure that those people will access social housing. So you basically agree with some of the criticism that has been addressed to USH on the fact that vulnerable people sometimes do not access to social housing, right? Do I understand correctly?
Yeah, we agree. It's a reality. I mean, we are not the one who are producing the rules to allocate the social housing, but it's true that in the fact it's most difficult to access to our stock when you are a part of the most disadvantaged people. Even if in our stock we are housing already much more low income household than in other one or like monoparental households. So it's true that allocation criteria are really complicated in France, are many also, with so many priorities that you are losing maybe priorities. So it's true that those criticism are based on facts. So of course, I don't know yet, because it's coming from last week, what will be the result of it, but it's true that young people or most disadvantaged people, for them it's really difficult to access, but it's also because of the characteristic of the stock, because of course if you want only a one-bedroom apartment or so on, there's no enough on our stock today, so it's much more complicated too.
Okay, thank you very much. That's very interesting. So we're going to see now in Austria what's happening, so that we can maybe indeed share experience between one country to another. So thank you, Virginie. Do not hesitate to intervene or ask questions if you want. Now, Gerlinde, hello, good afternoon. So please, now the floor is yours to explain a bit what the situation in Austria regarding the role of social housing cooperation.
Yeah, hello everybody, hello Julia, and thank you Virginie. I think there are quite a few parallels between France and Austria. The question was, is there a new role for social cooperative and public housing in fighting homelessness? I'm not sure if I can answer, but I will try. First, I would like to sum up a slide that I have showed already before in another webinar when we were talking about the COVID-19 reactions, where we said in times of crisis, a resilient system can prove its value. And I think it is evident that this resilience is crucial when it comes to the question, do I have a home or not? And only those people can stay at home that have a home. Therefore, it is really a question, can we answer or can we show our resilience also towards the people who are in risk of losing their home, and also, of course, towards our own tenants. So that would be the first group, our tenants. How can we show the resilience towards our tenants? Related to COVID-19, there have been a lot of measures, both by our sector and of course also by other institutions and legal measures. I would like just to point out a few things where we, a sector, where, if you want, a little bit the forerunners. Already in March, our chairman pronounced an immediate ban of evictions for our sector during the pandemic. And also he called for a generous acceptance of rent deferral agreements, usually on an interest-free basis. And those two claims were then made obligatory later by the federal government by an amendment of the tenancy law. So, and then for all tenancies, also for private tenancies, it was a bit different. Still, we remained more generous, but now there is a complete ban of evictions, for instance, but only for the couple of months, for the 3 months of the pandemic. And then we also gave special information and administrative assistance to apply for extra housing allowances. But those extra housing allowances were issued by the region, so by regional authorities. And then there were some specific measures towards people who are already homeless or already homeless before the COVID-19 crisis. For instance, so-called winter day centers or warm-up cafes, they remained open in spring. Normally they close in the end of March, and they remained open. And also there were a few extra shelters, not so much to accommodate more people, but mainly to help keeping distance rules during the pandemic. But for our role, our sector was more active in the question of securing tenancies, securing the tenants, and less in the question of emergency shelters. That was not so much our task. And when we now ask, was this enough, or what is the right point or the right time to react or to act? We saw that, in fact, the visible presence of homeless people really decreased during the lockdown. That has various reasons. For instance, the hidden homelessness. There were a lot of informal solutions, temporary solutions, and of course also the travel restrictions also did a contribution that less people entered Austria or some places. But what we expect that the stronger and more visible housing crisis will come in the aftermath of the pandemic. So in the next years, it was very clear during the last crisis, the great financial crisis of 2008, that showed an increase of homeless people, but during the 3 to 5 years after the crisis. So in fact, the peak was in 2013, and what we expect when housing affordability decreases on the long run because of permanent income loss, or when informal or temporary solutions come to an end, and also when immigration takes off again, then we will have the real housing crisis, which is not evident yet, maybe at the moment. All right. One solution to this could be the long-term strategy of housing first, as also Virginie spoke about this approach to skip the traditional staircase model for homeless people to somehow earn the final apartment through different steps of night shelter, temporary housing, until you finally get the real rental contract, but to really at first immediately get the key and the rental contract, and be assisted with supportive services people need to keep their housing and to avoid returning to homelessness. So this is, in our understanding, the most inclusive solution for homelessness. And already before the crisis, the limited profit housing associations were the most important partners of social NGOs when it comes to housing first. So we have approximately 2,000 housing first homes. The programs are existing since 2006, and we have 9 active housing first programs that is always related to a regional program, long-term program, twinning social NGOs with housing associations. And most of them are with major or even exclusive participation of limited profit housing associations at the landlord side. But still, at the moment, it is very evident that the Austrian Federation for Institutions Working with the Homeless, the BAVO, claim for a broad extension of housing first offers, including also mandatory quotas. So that is at the moment the policy to try to extend these offers on a very broad basis. Very briefly on the success criteria, but also on the challenges. Do I have 1 or 2 more minutes, or is it already at the end?
No, that's okay. Okay, take your time. It's fine.
I try to make it short. What we experienced in the last years, there are some really crucial success criteria for housing first. The first is we need to have a good partnership and a defined partnership between the NGO and the housing association, meaning also a clear division of labor, meaning, for instance, that social work is done by the social NGO and the landlord is not contacted for any social issues or issues with housing allowances and so on. Second, that it's very important to have a continuity of cooperation between the housing provider and the social NGO, even when the tenant has ceased the personal assistant contract with the NGO, because the principle of housing first is that the tenant can also decide to end this personal assistance. But even in these cases, it is important for us as housing associations to have a contact person from the side of the NGO to intervene in cases there are any difficulties, rent arrears or other difficulties. And then, of course, it's very important to keep stable and socially mixed neighborhoods, which also means not to concentrate housing first tenants too strongly. And then you see already the challenges. We have made the experience one size doesn't fit all. There are some housing estates where a further concentration of vulnerable people would endanger the social balance. And then the second argument is the same as Virginie already said. We mostly have a cost rent regime, and this makes it's hard for people with no or very low income to pay our rent. So at least the newer parts of our stock is hardly accessible for people with extremely low income. We don't have such a thing as very social housing in our stock, or not really, not in a defined way. And then also there is no public support or no rent guarantees for landlords participating in housing first. So it is more or less a bottom-up initiative of the housing association and the NGO to provide such a system. When you now ask, can you end homelessness? I think we should answer, yes, we can, but not alone. Our sector cannot alone find the solutions for this problem. We need the strategic partnerships with social organizations, by a regular exchange, also by making good examples known, and by making these long-term partnerships. Then also with the regional governments, to look at the housing allowances systems if we need readjustments. Also for the object relating subsidy schemes towards the question of very social housing, and also the allocation rules. And last but not least, also with the national governments, with everything that comes to the question of social policy, unemployment benefit, when this remains too low for a very long time, then the affordability just is not given in our sector. And also the national government is in charge of the tenancy law and the Limited Profit Housing Act. So only together it can function. And now to answer the initial question, a new role for our sector, I would say yes and no. Our sector already before the COVID-19 crisis played an important role in preventing homelessness and make people re-enter the housing system. But of course, the COVID-19 crisis has exacerbated systematic flaws in the overall social system, not only in the housing system, and raised public awareness concerning the right to housing. And I would like to give this also to our sector, that it's now the moment to raise the sector's social profile and show more action than reaction. And be more the front runners also in this domain.
Thank you very much, Gerlinde. So show more action than the reaction, but on the other hand, one of the key messages from your presentation, actually the same as Virginie, that money is essential, because indeed the rent that you can provide to this kind of people has to be very low. So you have to have some sort of compensation or guarantee for rent losses that you don't have at the moment in Austria, and that is not existing in France neither. So when you say show action more than reaction, but if there's no financial means to do it, seems to be quite complicated. What do you?
And I'm aware of this maybe contradiction, but up to now it functioned mainly via bottom-up initiatives, with the exception of one region in Austria where the system was compulsory, so there was already a quota. And all the other regions, it was more or less bottom-up and in different intensities. And the sector as a whole is not too fond of compulsory quotas, but on the other hand, it is the time to show that we can do more. We can have attractive offers, and there are possibilities also in the existing system. But if we really want to, if there should be a quota, it is not decided yet, an overall quota for housing first, then we need to have the possibility to steer in a or to guide. For instance, not to have in some houses 100% concentration of vulnerable people, which of course would be the consequences if you only get to the question of money, because a certain stock of is the cheapest one. That's the old stock, and if we say we concentrate there all the housing first people, that could be a risk. So we would rather distribute over different sectors, even also in the new sector, in the new stock, where it might be more difficult. So in these cases, maybe with a little bit more of money, but with the possibility to to show good examples, but not to have a one size fits all rule.
Okay, thank you very much, Galinde. That was very useful and very interesting. So now, if it's possible, we're going to Ireland, and if Donald is with us. If the case, I'm happy to give you the floor, Donald, to explain a bit what the point of view of Ireland, which actually have introduced some clear and strong criteria related to allocation of social housing to homeless people. And so it's interesting to see where the situation is at the moment and what the Housing Association in Ireland what they are doing to cope with the increasing challenges. So, Donald, floor is yours.
Hi, Gillian, and hi everybody all around Europe. Thanks for the invitation to contribute. I just noticed in terms of the question, is there a new role for social housing in fighting homelessness? Probably our sector in Ireland has been fighting it for a long time. We're in a sense come from a different position than Galinde and Virginie in terms of having a more residual role. We're actually looking to expand our offering from a residual role into more mainstream mental housing role. So basically in our sector, we have 40,000 homes that covers families, low incomes, single people, older people, disability and the homeless. So roughly about 10 to 15% of our stock would be for formerly homeless households. And I'll explain how the interventions happen from that perspective. I'd say our sector provides a lot of services directly to tenants for homeless people, either directly themselves or in partnership with other companies. It's the way they've emerged and born over the years as service organisations and then set up as housing associations. So probably slightly different than other countries. Last year was probably our biggest delivery of social housing ever. We produced over 4,100 homes. That was a record level. We have a lot of government support in Ireland for social housing, both on object and subject subsidies from that perspective. And that's why we're looking to move more into cost rental housing for those income groups between 50,000 and 75,000 of income. Social housing in Ireland is usually under 40,000 of net income. So last year we produced our highest ever number of social housing homes, both with larger mainstream housing associations and also for special needs housing providers for the homeless. In Ireland, just the background, even for a small country, we've 9,500 households who are classed as homeless, who live in temporary accommodation, and that has fallen in the last 2 months. There's a lot of the homeless households now have been accommodated in former Airbnbs, private leasing with landlords. But the one thing I have noticed over the years in terms of homelessness per se, whether it's an affordability housing problem or it's a social issue, I've noticed in the last 10 years, more homeless households are becoming homeless because of affordability problems in housing costs In the past, it used to be social issues, addiction, mental health, and so forth. And that's where our members initially targeted various different households. But in the last 10 years, and in the last 5 years, the majority of homeless families in Ireland and in Dublin, for instance, are coming through the private landlord sector, where the rents are too high and the tenancy regulations are quite weak. So that's the single pathway of the new homeless households in recent years. And we also have a phenomenon of homeless homeowners. When the last crash 5-6 years ago, we had a lot of homeowners that couldn't pay their mortgage, and then they may have lost their home because of defaulting. Where housing associations have had a role here, we're involved in what they call a mortgage to rent. So those tenants or those owners who are vulnerable can opt to be a tenant of a housing association and transfer that asset to a housing association to pay affordable rent. So that's quite a practical solution we've involved in. Now, it hasn't yielded a huge amount of numbers to date in terms of tenants making that transfer, but I do see that as one issue in the coming months and years, where you're going to have homeowners who may not be able to go back to work, who may not be able to pay a mortgage, and will seek options like mortgage to rent. So that's one practical issue our sector has been involved in. A number of housing associations have achieved that. I think the big thing in Ireland has been, and there was a report came out last week, that Dublin has the highest city for rental costs. I think it was over €2,000 compared to other cities within the European Union. And as it's having a major pressure, it did have a major pressure on the rental housing market. Over the next 5 to 6 months, we will see what impact COVID-19 will have on property prices and also rental costs. At the moment, we see rental costs, private rental costs in some areas going down by about 10-15%. So we don't know if that's temporary or is it a medium-term issue. I suspect when all the state interventions are taken away, you will see more effect on the housing market. Interventions like, unemployed people being paid a higher support, higher social protection, owners not being allowed to be evicted from their homes. So if those state measures are removed, you will see a major impact on the housing market in my opinion. I think that the three major interventions that our members have played and continue to play in relation to homelessness and fighting homelessness have been these areas. One has been the targeted projects for homeless households who had special needs, like formerly people with mental health issues, women fleeing domestic violence, and rough sleepers. So that has been the first targeted projects. They're probably less than they were 10 years ago. I think Housing First has taken over in Ireland. It's been quite a big programme since 2011 with Housing First. It has a success rate of about 85%, which is quite high in terms of tenancy impact. And it's really the wraparound services have worked well for preventing vulnerable households. The secondary are allocations that Virginia mentioned. And really, there has been quotas in the past given by government to social housing, both public authorities and housing associations and cooperatives. That has been up to 50% of new allocations would be for homeless households. Now that was dropped a few years ago because it was seen as too much of a crude instrument to try and get social mix and social cohesion in projects. But still, homeless households have a relative priority in terms of being housed in social housing. I think the other areas, the government, a new government will like to be in place and will have a big programme for social housing, new social housing of around 50,000 homes. So increasing the supply of social and affordable housing at affordable rents to allow those rents to compete with the private market will, in a broad way, help vulnerable households and homeless households. So that's really the interventions that the sector has been involved in the past and will continue to increase, especially with there's a major commitment to increase the Housing First programme. And Ireland's got internationally accredited with their programme in recent months. Since COVID-19, a lot of work done in Dublin, especially a lot of partnership working between our members, local authorities, the state bodies, even the ministers have got involved to try and lessen the impact on homeless households of COVID-19, and the outcomes have been very good. There's been very few cases of COVID-19 with homeless households in Dublin. I'll explain why in a second. All the homeless households have been by and large tested, and where they've had symptoms, they've been moved out of congregated settings into hotels, and some of our members manage the hotels that are that have social distance measures in place, and the tenants are socially isolated. So some of our members have been very, very active and leading the charge on trying to make sure there isn't a massive spread in congregated homeless shelters in Dublin. I think there's only in Dublin there've been only 2 deaths for homeless households, which is amazing. So there's a program called Safety Net, where the health service contact all the homeless households and test them, and if they are positive, then they move them to other isolated areas. So that's been a big impact. And a couple of the housing associations now manage the hotels. That's a temporary measure. Manage the hotels where homeless households have been, put to in the short term. I think the other area where the sector has been asked to get involved in is direct provision for asylum seekers, and that's been more recent, asked by the government, because they're living in pretty crappy accommodation, former holiday homes and so forth. So they've asked the sector to get involved, and a few of our members have got actively involved in that. I think in the whole process in the last couple of months, the mainstream housing association provider of mainstream housing have kept up their allocation process, either through interviewing on YouTube or FaceTime, all those sort of measures to get people housed. So a lot of the allocations have continued throughout that period. The government had to close all building sites, so we asked the government to progressively open the social housing sites. So they opened the social housing sites first. 67 social construction sites were opened, and that allowed more vulnerable households and homeless households to be housed in the short term. Since that, the government have opened the rest of the building sites. So that was positive. Obviously, we were keen to ensure all the social distancing measures were in place, that there wasn't a transmission of COVID opening the sites as such. Like, some of our members have also been involved with local authorities to organise long-term leases up to 25 years for homeless households in former Airbnb properties, and private landlords have been keen to do that because the tourism market has crashed in Dublin and Galway in particular, and they want a longer term certainty than just Airbnb. So it's a short-term measure. I think the Airbnb market will come back again, and it's the current housing problems in Ireland are a bit like 2013 when the housing crash happened. We had loads of vacant properties, okay, and the rents came down. This is very similar in 2020, where the rents are going down and we've allegedly vacant properties, but that's masking a fundamental structural problem. We need more social and affordable rented housing, so we have to argue through that issue as such. I think looking at the future and solutions even for Housing Europe, I think definitely, like Galinda, Housing First is proven. It can have a strong role for our members, both directly or in partnership with other players. I think there will be a demand on the social housing waiting list in Ireland. It's about 69,000 for a small country, which is quite high. But the key thing we do need are more 1 and 2 person properties being developed and constructed. There are too many 3-bedded properties. We need 1 or 2. Most of the demand in Ireland for social housing is basically 1 or 2 person households who are aged between 25 and 55 and came from the private landlord sector and couldn't afford the rent. That's really a generalization, but it's fundamentally the pathway. And about 10% of older people over 65. So our call would be to continue to expand, Housing First, increase the social housing supply, which the government have committed to. And I noticed in the in European social pillar, they talk about indicators as well. I think there's one indicator in terms of overcrowding. Now that's a crude enough instrument for the housing dimension, but there's something housing Europe we could work on to have realistic indicators in terms of that homelessness dimension in the scorecard they have within the platform. So look, that's my summary from that point of view. I think there is potential. I think at the moment, I'd be interested to see what you mentioned, Juliana, about the COVID funding program. Some of our members in Ireland were interested in that on the service side, and I know that the European social pillar mentioned the idea of services, so that's one area that our national government may not be contributing as much. So we think maybe that's one area that's the COVID supported program could feed into housing. So I hope that was of some use. What we're doing. Finally, the semester report in Ireland specifically mentioned homelessness and the need for social and affordable housing, and our sector is playing a small part in trying to increase that. So at the European level, that was helpful to keep the message going, where homelessness is linked to social and affordable housing. So thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Donald. Actually, I will come back to the question of the European semester in a minute. But now, just to react to your point, I think you really very well summarized some of the most important tools for social housing providers when they are tasked to deal with the homeless and housing exclusion. And I think the interesting aspect is the change of profile of homeless people. You said that originally, basically, was a lot of people with a mental health issue, drugs addiction issue, and so on. And now we are facing a situation where affordability problems is the main factor for new homeless households. Now, in this context, it's probably important to realize that housing first is not the only option or the sole strategy towards fighting homelessness, because it was developed as a way to deal with people with mental health or drug addiction problems. So now, if homeless people have different profile and different factor behind their situation, probably the strategy has to evolve, and that's why in Ireland you have developed other intervention programs dedicated to specific groups, which is certainly also something that housing providers have to look at. Not only housing first in the original concept, but also different intervention programs. But I also note that your final conclusion was about the importance of having more properties, having more social housing housing units, which is, I think, something common across the membership of Housing Europe. And this is something which has to be conveyed at the highest level from the European Union or to the national or regional government. And yeah, this is why now I'm going to briefly talk about what the EU can do to support you in dealing with this, in developing this variety of strategies from housing first into a more specific intervention programs targeted specific groups, but also reflecting on the allocation process. So now I will share indeed my screen very briefly. 2 seconds, check. So I think now you are supposed to see the screen. Tell me if it's not the case. Yeah, I will not go through everything, but what we wanted to do is to check a bit how we are now in this reflection on the recovery plan, the pillar of social rights, and the impact on your activities on fight against housing exclusion. And actually, Donald, you mentioned this briefly, pointing out the European semester, and we'll see that it's an important, maybe now and even more than before, it's an important element on which we have to have an impact. So yeah, just briefly, not going into all the details, but that was the policy landscape before the COVID crisis. So you had in the middle social, cooperative and public housing, and you have different forces in a way that influence at the European level the work of our members. On the one hand, on the left-hand side, European Green Deal. On the right-hand side, the European Pillar of Social Rights. Those are two sets of requirements towards the social housing providers. Requirements on sustainability on the one hand, requirements regarding social inclusion on the other hand. And of course, to deal with that, beyond the national level, you have at the bottom finance and regulation from the EU, and we'll see in more details a bit about finance, but regulation is also important, whether it's state aid and other things, but we're not going to dwell on too much of that today. And on the top of the chart is European semester. Is indeed the series of recommendations that the EU and the member state themselves are doing to member states, or to the members of the European Union. And this European semester has gained has gained a new importance with the recovery plan, and I will explain now. Before explaining now, one of the very interesting things today was the question of the impact of the crisis, the COVID crisis on housing inclusion. And clearly the message is it is too early to know exactly how things will happen, but we know the situation will get worse in 2021. And these two graphs here taken from a European publication showing the evolution of the and the overlap between the people at risk of poverty, severe material deprivation, and low work intensity from 2010 to 2017. And we clearly see an increase of the number of people at risk of poverty in the EU. And it's evident, it's obvious that the COVID crisis will lead to an further increase of the people facing at risk of poverty, facing low work intensity, and facing severe material deprivation. And of course, when you are in the middle, so in the overlap of this is the worst situation. And indeed, homeless is a situation which can be, in the middle of these three social evolutions. So, if now we are asked by the Commission, so what is situation in different countries? It's probably difficult to give a clear view, but what is almost certain is that in 2021, those figures will get worse in terms of all the social challenges that people will face, and this will have a consequence on their ability to pay for an accommodation. And we come back again to the point made by Donald, that the new profile of homeless people is really related to affordability, which is something which is a bit new and which require a structural and long-term response, as opposed to a more targeted intervention. Those targeting interventions will still be needed, but probably on top of a more structural response. And the recovery plan is supposed to help member states to have this long-term response and structural response. And I took a part of a document that we sent to all members. You may have received it weeks ago. The recovery plan is made of different pillars, and the most important one in terms of money is the first one, which is called the Recovery and Resilience Facility, because it will give money to member states, so-called grants. I say so-called because in the end, this money will have to be reimbursed to the international market over 30 years. So at some point, member states will have to reimburse it through the EU budget, even though it's long-term. But still, okay, let's call them grants in the short term, non-repayable in the short term. I mean, this money is supposed to help member states to address a number of issues.
Julien, your camera froze there for a second.
Okay. Do you hear me?
Why?
Yes.
Maybe I have to move. Do you hear me?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Do you hear me? Okay,
yes.
perfect. So So yeah, so I was saying that this money is supposed to help member states addressing a number of issues, including things that have been identified within the European semester. And if you see this chart, you see the recent country-specific recommendation for the different countries. It's not completely exhaustive, but you see Ireland, as you said, Donald, Ireland has a recommendation to increase the provision of social and affordable housing, which means that Ireland, in their national recovery plan, to get the money of the EU, can certainly say, okay, we need money to increase the provision of social and affordable housing, and they will basically get the money. Now, it's not clear whether, of course, we are in a negotiation about this plan, and it's not clear whether members will be, in a way, happy to ask the EU for the money if at some point, even if it's in 30 years, they will have to reimburse it. But still, I think it's an important point to make that in your discussion with the government, there is a strong argument in favor of investing in social housing, particularly countries which have a recommendation in that sense in the European semester. So yeah, but that was in a way the future or the hypothetical thing of the recovery plan. But we can use the full potential of the EU budget now, and I just briefly mentioned some of the aspects that the structural funds can target. Under the European Regional Development Fund, there are the possibility to spend money on increasing the socio-economic integration of disadvantaged groups, including housing issues, housing measures. So it was originally thought for countries like Eastern European countries facing issues with the integration of Roma and Roma people. But I mean, this is something which can be extended to different groups, including housing first programs. This is the same for the European Social Fund, which can be used to promote access to quality and sustainable and affordable service like housing, in a combination with other services, for instance, related to independent living, but also related to housing first. So that's the European structural funds, which are grants, but which will require co-financing, so indeed money from the member states. And there's also the InvestEU, so the new program that will provide a guarantee. So not money, but a guarantee to attract loans or to attract other form of investment. And the interesting thing with InvestEU is that they mention specifically a project around affordable social housing, consisting of different type of operations. First of all, the provision of new non-segregated rental social housing. Then you may use the InvestEU to set up social rental agency, or to provide housing-led solutions like housing first. So that's interesting, although again, this is a EU guarantee which is supposed to help attracting private finance or public finance. So there is a bit of financial engineering to be made around that, but potentially a cooperation between social housing providers and social services provider can be developed around the creation of a project that can be financed by InvestEU. So there's also the possibility under InvestEU to create what we call investment platform at the regional level or national level, or a thematic platform that can finance housing-led solutions, for instance. And although it's only a guarantee in a way, it can be very useful in countries where the public authorities do not have the ability to provide any kind of support, including guarantee. So that's something which we have to bear in mind in the EU budget. There will be opportunities to finance all the kind of programs and interventions that you've mentioned today. And that was indeed more generally our calls for the recovery plan. That has been only partly addressed, but yeah, we'll work on it. So now that's the end of my short contribution with the slides. And so the questions to the speakers can be submitted to in the chat box, which is on the right side. I've just seen so far a question from Marion, our colleague Marion, to Virginie. Can you explain, Virginie, a bit more your idea about the fact that socializing should be a key element of a well-functioning housing market? I think that's been also reformulated by Donald and by Gerlinde. I think this is one of the clear consensual idea of today, is that yeah, we don't work in isolation. So Virginie, I don't know if you want to expand a bit this idea.
Yeah, it just we all know that it's a housing crisis everywhere. So it means that something is not working on the housing market. And according to us, there's a problem of a regulation of the market. So of course, we need to have many kind of actors, private, non-for-profit, social, public, and so on. But we need to rethink the regulation of the whole housing market to have as a common goal the access of the market of the most vulnerable and affordable housing for everyone also. So that means that we need to rethink about ruling, for example, when we receive support by state aid, put some condition for the different actors and not only maybe for social landlords. Or when you receive, I don't know, there's many ways that public intervention can exist. But of course, this kind of intervention, which is a regulation or financing, need to have a counterpart to facilitate the access to housing and to make work all the partner of the housing market in the common goals to have a well-functioning market and not only making some profit or to push for more and more financialization. I'm not sure if I was clear, but I hope.
Yeah, I think it's very clear, and this is one of the central points. I mean, talking about the situation, the growing housing inequalities, which has been allowed by a dysfunctioning housing market, by dysfunctioning tax policies towards homeownership, for instance, by also in general the fact that if you have basically inherited, you are really better positioned to start your life, and therefore you have an accumulation of inequalities. So I think it's a very general conversation about how we treat housing inequalities, but also the conversation about public services, as you mentioned. I mean, we probably need a number of services around housing, which will allow people to have, a dignified life, even though in context where housing is very expensive. I mean, the affordability of housing is really related to the affordability of public services, and in countries which higher housing prices, but with affordable public services, I mean, the situation is probably manageable. While if you have basically everything expensive, something is very difficult. So one question is on Housing Europe, which probably one of the colleagues is. Would you like to the speakers? Would you like to see more on housing in the European semester? As I said, the European semester potentially will gain importance with the recovery plan, but we are always cautious of the EU having a very top-down or prescriptive approach on housing. So, what's your take on where we are now? Are we at a crossing point where we need to basically decide whether we want to have more housing at the European level within this semester? Who wants to take the floor? Virginie or Galinda, and then we'll see with Donald.
It's Virginie. Yes, of course, housing is not a competence. So, of course, we don't want to see too much housing policies intervention in a European semester. But as the semester is dealing with the finance in general and investment, the shift that the European semester already did on having a multi-aspect analysis of housing market should be welcome, of course, but need to be clear. But we don't want to have too much prescription, as you explained. And what we are expected is that to be allowed to invest for the future in social infrastructure, and to be in relation also with public spending, not to be considered only as a spending, but only on investment, and which can be supported at EU level.
Thank you. Galinda, you want to add something to that? Galinda, we don't hear you. Probably you're muted. Yeah, you're muted.
Okay, just one sec, please.
Yeah, we're going to unmute Galinda if you don't do it yourself. In the meantime, there was a subsequent question is indeed about the indicators.
Connected.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah,
so I've been muted.
Yeah.
Hi. In fact, I just can confirm what Virginie already said. So, of course, everything is good that enlarges the possibilities for financing, but not at the cost of additional restrictions, extent of competences that are not EU competences, and especially not for the cost that the focus is limited to the very social or for the most vulnerable groups. But in fact, for the question to invest and not to have funds for investment and not as just grants, I think that would be very interesting. I also was very interested by the fact that you told also about InvestEU, that the guarantees would also be a possibility in this domain of housing first. I think we have not thought about that yet.
Thank you. Yes, it's something which is new. I mean, it's not something that has been developed so far, and everything which requires financial engineering is difficult. So the sector is used to have in a way simple long-term relationship with the financial actors, and to have something a bit new will require time. So probably not something that will help solve the whole problem in a short term. One of the subsequent question, I think it's our colleague Alice who put that, was about the indicators. We briefly mentioned that with Donald. Do we need other indicators to help guide the policy on housing? I mean, we have indicators on what we call affordability, so it's usually housing cost divided by or on the rental disposable income. We have indicators on the quality of housing. This is the overcrowdedness indicators. Do we need something else that will help you, in your work? So Donald, if you want to, because I didn't give you the floor on your semester, you want to maybe expand on that, and then I will ask Virginie and Galinda.
Yeah, it's a tricky one. Like, okay, you could argue it's something like indicator on access to housing, but it's more a slippier term. I think the affordability can be difficult, but at least you have a metric, 30 to 35% of I'm just trying to think offhand what are the other indicator. I think some of the indicators will rise in terms of maybe the semester, because where these reports emerge from, which you remember the whole banking disaster crisis, and you had somebody from the European Commission had a meeting at Housing Europe in your offices, and housing wasn't really mentioned at all. It was talking about trying to solidify the banking system and the whole financial crisis at that time. And obviously we argued that housing was a major part of the housing crisis. Maybe it may be something to do with like mortgage default or something, because I do think that's one thing I can see happening, which will have an impact on social and affordable housing providers. There will be an increase in defaults in mortgages potentially, unless there is some deferral by banks. So that'll be an indicator of a failure in a housing system linked to financial system. You know, if there's an increase, okay, in the past it was mostly Spain and Ireland had those figures of indicators, but it was an indicator of housing market failure. And you know, and I think that's the only one I can think think of. Just go back to the previous question. I would agree with both Regina and Galinda on the whole language about investment and not expenditure. I think in Housing Europe, if that could be articulated in a quite practical way, what are we talking about? A return over 30 years. We have examples of what happens with investment in social housing. So I think we need to really major on that sort of language of investment and not expenditure, because that feeds into things like Eurostat classification and all that, goes in the stability pack numbers as well. But like that's the only thing I can think of Angela, in terms of indebtedness and mortgage default as an indicator.
Yeah, thank you. Maybe Galinda, Virginie, on the indicators question.
Virginie, just maybe to add an information point that I already delivered in the context of COVID reaction we had in Union Sociale pour l'Habitat. Concerning indicators, we noticed the relation of death and or health condition in our stock in France, in Paris area. So we decided to put in place and elaborate a new indicator related to social housing stock and quality after this crisis. So it could be also in the future a good indicator to show the necessity to have a good quality and affordable, of course, housing for people in this context.
Yes, that's very interesting. So yeah, please. I mean, I guess you already did it, but if you can resend information on that, that would be very useful in our response to the consultation on the European pillar. Because I mean, part of the response will be about illustrating or documenting the impact or the increasing housing exclusion. So we are happy to have any kind of survey or figures that you have done in general. This is a message to all members who are listening today. Galinda, you want to add something on that?
Yeah. I'm not too familiar with the indicators. Maybe something about the different target groups. So to differentiate between target groups would be a possibility, and maybe also to focus on low-income groups or on women or families. But yeah, I'm not too familiar with these indicators.
Thank you very much. I think we are nearing the end of the webinar. One last thing is, Soka asked a question about whether we need more exchange of information or exchange between members on housing first. Or I would extend this question to encompass housing-led solutions or other type of similar interventions. Well, I guess the answer would be yes, but if you want to add something on this before we close. Galinda, for instance.
I said already yes in the chat.
Okay.
I said already yes in the chat.
Okay, good. Donald, you want to do you have a final round of?
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah. No, that's me. Thanks a lot for the exchange for you. So.
Okay, thank you very much. Virginie, you want to add something?
No, just to remind the good paper that LPHA produced on housing first already. So it's a good basis.
Okay, so that's the end of the webinar. So thank you very much for your attention, and it has been recorded, so we will take the opportunity to put this online very soon. So thank you very much, and have a good day.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye,
Thank you.
everyone.
Bye bye.
Bye.
See you, Evelyn.